Morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a recent video of none other than Nelson Chamisa in Mashingo being mobbed like a rock star. Well, I could play the whole video. The whole point is it was just a crowd, all of them mobbing him. What I would like to know is how many of them really understood what went on during the last election, 2023. How many of them have understood the reality, the political reality in Zimbabwe? The very fact that Zimbabwe had another rigged election. I've played on this platform videos of Nelson Chamisa telling people they should go and prepare because he is preparing to form the next government. God has decreed it that there will be a new democratic government in Zimbabwe. It is preparing his cabinet. God is in it. And that was just a few days before the election itself. And the day after the election, it was clear Zanu PF had a clear majority in parliament and had won the presidency. We're back to where we were. Zimbabwe is a failed state because we have failed to govern ourselves. Whether we like to admit it or not, that is the truth. And we keep repeating the same mistake over and over again. There's nothing new in that. It was the philosopher George Sandawana who said that those who fail to learn from the past are doomed to repeat the same mistake. And by God, we are repeating the same mistake over and over again. Zimbabwe is a failed state because we have failed to govern ourselves. That cannot be denied. Why is it that we fail to govern ourselves? Because we have not been paying attention to detail. That's why. We have failed to hold free, fair, incredible elections. And it's now 43 years and counting. One is going to ask, why is it in this day and age, 2,500 years after the Greeks gave their greatest gift to mankind, democracy, we do not have to reinvent the wheel. We only have to apply it. And yet here we are. We can't hold free, fair, and credible elections. We can go back to 1980. 1980, Zanu PF did not hold free, fair, and credible elections. As much as the party would want the ordinary person to believe that they were fighting to end white colonial domination and introduce a just society in Zimbabwe, the truth of the matter is Robert Gabriel Mugabe and his cronies, they were fighting to replace the whites so that they could become the new oppressors. Even if they didn't want to admit it at the time, that is exactly what has happened in reality. The prospects of a free, fair, and credible election in 1980 loomed large. Robert Mugabe and his cronies decided that if they were to hold those elections and they were free, fair, and credible, and they lose, they could not stand that. So they made it clear that if those elections were held and they failed to win the elections, the Bush War would continue. In other words, they were not willing to accept the results. The ordinary people, ordinary villagers, particularly in the rural areas, we had seen so much of the war and were desperate to see an end to it. We voted to end the war. You cannot pretend that was a free, fair, and credible election. Some people have argued that it was just an election gimmick. They would have accepted the democratic will of the people. You only have to look at what happened 3 years after the independence, 1983, when Zanu PF launched the Kukura. There can be no denying that Kukura-Wunti's, the primary purpose of Kukura-Wunti was to coerce the late Joshua Nkomo and his SAPU colleagues to give up their party SAPU and join ZANU. Those who are familiar with Zimbabwe's political armed struggle will tell you that there had been several attempts to unify the two parties, but they had failed in the past because the two leaders and the leaders within both sides, both camps, did not trust the other ones. They wanted to have power and they did not trust the other side to share it. And indeed, one could even say they didn't want to share it. Both ZAPU and ZANU wanted a one-party state. ZANU wanted a ZANU PF one-party state. ZAPU wanted a ZAPU one-party state. And the only reason why we didn't have a one-party state is because they could not agree on which one. And the Gukurahundi was meant to force the issue. Pure and simple. I think the tragedy is that Zimbabweans, the ordinary Zimbabweans, have been very slow in learning from the past. After independence, the people were so animated with Zanu PF. You risk being lynched literally if you were to publicly denounce Zanu PF soon after independence. Mugabe was a god, untouchable. It took nearly 20 years for people to realize that Zanu PF were a party of thugs, ruthless thugs for that matter, who were in power. And they wanted absolute power. They would never allow the ordinary people to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. And they would rig the elections to make sure that they have got the iron grip on power. The whole point of the turn of the century, the late 1990s, when people said we want democratic change, was exactly that. People finally realized as long as Zanu PF has got carte blanche powers to rig elections, there will be no meaningful political change in the country. None. And so the decision was, okay, let's elect an opposition party that will implement the democratic changes necessary to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That was the number one step. Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends stepped forward, claiming that they will deliver those democratic changes the nation was dying for. The party's name was to underline that, a movement for democratic change. And yet, 23 years down the line, including 5 in the GNU, MDC, Triple C have not implemented even one token reform. We're still, since the GNU debacle, these MDC, Triple C leaders have been participating in these flawed elections out of greed. We cannot pretend that we don't know that. And yet, here we are. We have been going through this over and over again. The people, the ordinary people, were told, were warned again and again that without reforms, nothing will change. Sorry about that. That was our Chamisa rock star crowd praising him once again. They were warned that without democratic change, nothing will change. And because they have never really taken the trouble to understand the underlying issues, they fail to understand it. There is absolutely, if the people were following the politics of the country, they would have realized by now that MDC leaders are not going to implement any meaningful democratic change to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. If anything at all, they've been participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. So if you accept that, the question then is, why are you keeping on participating then? And yet here we are. They are participating. George was right. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. If we have been repeating the same mistake the last 40 years, 43 years now, one has got to wonder whether we are incapable of learning anything, or are we doomed to be? We've been caught up in this cycle. We'll just be going round and round and round. And as long as we elect people who have already shown that they are not competent to implement even one meaningful reform, at the end of the day, no meaningful reform will be implemented. Chamisa and company will participate in the coming elections in 2028, promise once again that they're going to win and encourage people to participate. The people will foolishly participate and give Zanu PF legitimacy. And so the failed state will continue. We are our own worst enemy. There is nothing rocket science about understanding why we need reforms to stop Zanu PF from rigging the elections. And those reforms themselves are not rocket science either. And after 23 years, without even one token reform implemented, and Zanu PF blatantly rigging the elections, one has got to ask, why is it that we still have people who are so naive that they believe whatever is put before them? That they believe that the opposition is still fighting in their corner. But that is what it is. People are still believing that MDC are fighting in their corner. And the only benefactor of that is Zanu PF itself. Because as long as the opposition does not implement any meaningful reform and keep participating to give Zanu PF legitimacy, then Zanu PF will remain in power. But for some reason, when you've got the people who have got the vote and they cannot understand that you need a competent opposition to implement the reforms, to stop Zanu PF rigging the reforms, you are stuck. The people that don't want to learn, they should be asking themselves, what went wrong all these last 23 years? Why have we not even managed to implement one reform? They never ask that question. Many people have said that CCC is but Zanu PF Team B. In other words, they are in politics, pretending that they are a genuine opposition. In reality, they are Zanu PF Team B. They are playing to make sure that Team A wins, no matter what. And that would explain why Chamisa was so adamant in participating in elections last year, even when he could see the elections were being rigged. He didn't care. was prepared to make outrageous statements like I've plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes, when of course he had not done so. The people themselves should have woken up by now. After 23 years is a long time. What are you voting the opposition to do? If you can't answer that, you shouldn't be voting. If you haven't learned that simple reality, then no wonder the country is in a mess. I wouldn't put it beyond Zanu PF, of course, that some of these people who are coming out supporting Triple C are sponsored by Zanu PF. It is in the interest of Zanu PF that Team B remains on the field as the opposition. Because it is playing in their interest. They know if you're the genuine opposition party in Zimbabwe, it would have implemented the democratic reforms, forced Zanu PF to hold free, fair, and credible elections. They don't want that. So what better than to keep on sponsoring Team Zanu PF, Team B in all but name, to be the main opposition in the country? But still, I think from that video you could tell that there were genuinely some people, some Zimbabweans out there who believe that Nelson Chamisa and company will deliver the change they want. They are that simple. They don't understand what is going on. They don't understand what we're talking about when we're talking about reforms. But nonetheless, they still believe that Chamisa will deliver them. After 23 years, you have learned nothing. Well, I think there is some truth in saying that you're probably not going to learn anything. And as long as the majority of the voters are naive and ignorant, they don't even know that Zanu PF is sponsoring this Zanu PF Team B. They still believe that they're fighting for Povo when in reality Team B is fighting in Zanu PF's corner. And if after 23 years the penny has not dropped, the chances are it's not likely to drop. And so I think we can genuinely say Zimbabwe as a country, we are a failed state. And unless we learn from the past, we are doomed to remain that way. Thank you very much for joining us. In future, if you want to join in the conversation, I suggest you write your comments, and I will do my best to read them. And if you want to actually join and have your word, I can give you the link so that you could join in. But thanks again for joining in. It is a depressing situation, but there it is. That is the reality. The people have learned absolutely nothing in 43 years of elections. And if we can't even hold free, fair, and credible elections, I don't think we deserve a competent government. And so we are stuck with a corrupt, incompetent, tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship. We are doomed. Thank you again, and